like everything, either we see adversity as something that is going to leave us damaged, or adversity as something that is inevitable and often results in more positive than negative. So, it's not like we're going to seek out adversity, but clearly adversity is a path to betterment.
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prescription for Success. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, your host for the podcast, which is a production of MD Coaches, providing leadership and executive coaching for physicians by physicians to overcome burnout, transition your career, develop as a leader, or whatever your goal might be. Visit MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone. Well, my guest today is not only a busy and highly respected emergency medicine physician, he's also a successful entrepreneur. And one of his more recent projects is an app to streamline the transfer of critically ill patients to facilities where they can get proper care. So let's hear my conversation with Dr. Tony Macasaet. I'm really excited today to be speaking with Dr. Tony Macasaet up in the more rural area of, I guess it's northern Wisconsin. Is that right, Tony?
It's kind of, sort of northern Midwest, but like Southwest. Sounds so fancy. Yeah. Southwest Wisconsin. So
all of those streams that you were telling me about probably make their way out to the lakes of Minnesota, right?
So, well, that's an interesting question, because it's the flow, of the aqueous elements here, and where do they go? And it's just fun and noteworthy. I guess in my own little personal sense, because those bodies of flowing water all essentially end up in the Mississippi, so then Gulf of Mexico and out into the world. But and they all empty first into, most of them, I think, into the Wisconsin River. So that's like the big input, which is south of us, except literally for this little stream, which I'm looking at right now, this tiny little brook called the Bad Axe, which is another endearing name. And the Bad Axe empties is our claim to fame on my little valley here is it's one of the only streams that empties directly into the Mississippi without first going to the Wisconsin.
Well, that's terrific. This is the very first time that I have ever opened this program with a discussion of geography, but it is fascinating. So anyway, back to Dr. Tony Macasaet,
yes.
An emergency room physician in Viroqua, Wisconsin. Some really interesting stories to tell, Tony, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. But as is always the case, I like to begin with your origin story. So your path to medicine, did you start your medical career in utero, or did the idea come to you later, or how did that work out?
Yeah, well, probably like for many of us, I think it was a little bit of both, multifactorial path to medicine. Not to go back too deep, but my mother's dad was an Army psychiatrist back in the day. So kind of an interesting, like, genetic in utero element there. And then my father, the senior Dr. Macasaet, who just retired a few years ago, near 80 as a general surgeon, like, wow, in the belly at 75 or whatever. Like, Dad, you're setting the bar too high here. So
that's a lot of stamina.
And he's still, so now he's in his 80s, and some of the things we'll talk about, we're co-founders of some of these businesses that I'm involved with here outside of medicine. He was just the classic role model growing up with him, just the unquestionable resiliency and like sense of duty without any recognition, answering stat to the OR, pages from home for a crash C-section of his neighbor, baby in distress kind of thing. And it was just like, that was normalized the way I grew up. So maybe it's no wonder I ended up in, first in pre-hospital stuff and air medical HEMS type actions. And then, as an emergency physician and emergency physician educator and so on. And
so you had a really early exposure to what it's like to work when duty called.
I think I may be remembering this wrong, but I mean, I'm certainly there was a period of time, like he moved us here in 1973. He literally was, a little younger than my son, who's 11 now, during World War II, during the Japanese invasion just outside of Manila in a tiny town that's very analogous to Viroqua, which we mentioned. With like the brutality of like an invasion army in your little tiny town. I mean, as a little boy, I mean, really interesting, to kind of contemplate that kind of thing.
I bet it is. Yeah.
And then did med school there. He did med school in the PI, and then emigrated here to eventually go back to please his mother to his little town and be the town surgeon, so a little bittersweet because he then did a multitude of different surgical subspecialty fellowships and this and that, kind of as a means to sort of stay here because he got the America bug, which we could all imagine. Yeah. And then, fortunately or unfortunately, met my Jewish mother in Milwaukee during a cardiothoracic fellowship or some crazy thing that he did. And then
it's a little bit of an unusual man.
Right. So now there's my Catholic Filipino fresh off the boat dad, with this awkward, Jewish gal from Milwaukee. Needless to say, the mothers in law were not pleased for quite some time, but everybody got over it. I can
only imagine.
So, a year later, I am conceived and, in the summer of 69, literally. And, he ends up through this and that in Viroqua, this tiny town, which is not that different than it is today. And for years was the only surgeon. And, so he's on, what is that? Q day call.
Yeah, really.
Not even QOD. Like he's a daily call for decades, essentially. So he delivered, this is just crazy to think about, like he delivered more babies in this town by C-section than probably every other family practice, / OB provider combined. And of course, with his longevity, he delivered the babies of babies and, crazy things like that. So when I enter a room now, if I don't know the person or whatever, they're not necessarily expecting, who the doc is going to be, I'll say, I'm Dr. Macasaet, say it's an older person or whatever. And they'll look at me and I'll see instantly their expression. I'm like, version 2.0. And then everybody starts laughing. Oh, that's your dad. I get it. So
that's pretty cool.
It's kind of an endearing thing.
The atmosphere that you grew up in was the medical world, and it sounds like that there was never a point where you would say, I never want to be part of this if I ever get out of it. You were just committed from the beginning.
Well, actually, and this is like, again, the common narrative, almost a cliche. I was like, I'm not going to do what my dad does. I respect him. I love him, but I have to do my own thing. So, I was in, an entrepreneurial type of pathway for the first bit of time. And until I can't remember how I decided or why, but I started to volunteer with the local EMS service, first as like a volunteer right along, EMT and training. And
this was prior to college?
This was about the time I started college. So this would have been, and I finished school a little early just because of circumstances. So I think I started maybe messing around when I was about 17 as like a ride along, and then got the training and was able to go as crew after a while. But I remember rounding the bend on our first call, and it was a rollover MVC with people entrapped. And it was people I probably kind of knew. I mean, obviously this is a tiny rural area, and just the immediate, like, whole body, whole soul knowledge that I was like meant to be there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, part of it is, of course, dopamine and adrenaline and, sort
Sure.
of that kind of thing. But beyond just the immediate like rush of adrenaline and dopamine, it was like, I mean, I guess without getting too sappy, I mean, it was an oxytocin thing too, So
Well, it sounds like it was a really informative moment.
yeah, it was.
At that age, anyone with any sensibility at all would have understood if a teenager looked at that and said, I don't want any more of this.
Mm-hmm.
And that was not the case with you. So, I think it was an informative moment for you. And you mentioned that in undergraduate school, you only spent 3 years.
Oh.
I don't know if you want to get into why the rush, but
oh gosh, why the rush exactly?
But why the rush?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it goes to that thing, the whole deep living thing where it's just like it's not about the short term sprint, but like the lifelong pursuit of the dope oxytocin thing. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I mean, in retrospect, it's like, okay, it was whatever. It was good and bad, but I just was so driven. I remember thinking, and I was embarrassed when I thought it, but like that Alex Keaton was my role model. Like, I'm like, he's not supposed to be a role model, the type A jerk
That's
from Family
funny.
Ties. I know, it's like, what the heck, and so it's just like, yeah, like you said, I mean, it was this rush to get into med school, but I mean, the good part, it was also a hack. I mean, at that time, which is all probably different now, this would have been, 88, 89 era, where I went to school. I'm reading through the prerequisites and, sort of checking things off and trying to hack and scheme of how to best get in. It was like, where does it say there's, nowhere in the thing did it say these list of criteria. Did it say you needed a degree?
Mm-hmm.
Which maybe is still the case. And maybe there's, there's other models obviously where this is moot, but it was such a big deal. You got to get your biochem degree. And I was like, oh my gosh, I hate biochemistry. Like there's just something about it. I just hate it. So I asked, admissions and made calls and this and that, and just eventually realized that, yeah, I could, if I did well for the first 2 years, I'm an in-state kid, Madison, they want in-state people, like a lot of state schools. I mean, that's a part of their mission. And there were a lot of favorable elements. I did well academically and all these other kind of things. I tested well. So I did the prereqs. I got, at a 4.0, blah, 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 perfect letters, and applied after 2 years and got accepted. And then, you have to complete your third year. No expectation you're going to necessarily get a degree. And then they let me take a year off, which was, one of those other impactful years, which we can get into. But it was, it was a crazy year in EMS before I started med school.
Well, I was going to ask you, my next question was going to be, looking at it in hindsight, would you have done it any differently?
Yeah.
But you kind of did. I mean, it's not like you did 3 years of undergraduate and then you were in medical school.
Right. That's true.
You actually got some experience dealing with what you might be dealing with. But still, if you could go back and do it all over again, would you do it differently, or do you think you picked a pretty good plan?
No, I mean, for some reason, I've never really framed it that way because, back then things were so seemingly were more like culturally regimented. Like, of course you get your degree and you get, you do all these steps, and it was less about, hacking life, which is now like almost a necessity expectation versus, something niche and cool. So yeah, I mean, back then it was like this abhorrent thing to consider not going through the pathway, but then to reframe it, like you said, into the fact that, would I have rather had another, oh my goodness, a fourth or fifth year of biochemistry level stuff, like goodness gracious, versus this year, which ended up being unbelievable. I mean, what happened during the year that I happened to be on St. Croix in the United States Virgin Islands as a medic, where would I be without that year?
Yeah, really. And then I think the next question that should be obvious, or it's certainly obvious to me, I'm wondering, what was it like for you to leave that environment of a really intense boots on the ground experience with sick and injured people. Now you go back to first year of medical school and you're back to biochemistry and cellular physiology and that stuff.
Yeah.
How did that work out for you?
Right. I mean, and filled with less checked machismo and all that too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was really hard at times, just with some of the subjects I was less passionate about, or they were less well taught, or, all this variety of things that were a subject or a course isn't as stimulating as as another one might be to you personally. And those were really hard because I was, let's go out in the streets, should we crike this person or stupid things like that. That made you impatient, but I guess it's life, right? I mean, you got to learn to bring those things down. And I think I did. And I ended up doing fine. And then,
was there ever any doubt that you were going to go into emergency medicine?
The answer to the question is when I rounded that curve and there was the rollover and I just knew that's what I would likely do. And in other words, I went to med school not to be a physician, but to be an emergency physician. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, of course, it's like, well, I got to keep an open mind here. Who knows? So what I realized for myself, and I think this is true for a lot of emergency physicians, is that when you go through and you kind of like or love everything, then, maybe, you should either do family practice if that's sort of your temperament, or if you're more the ADD-ish type of thing, then, you should do emergency medicine. If you're successful as an emergency physician, as I think listening to some of your prior guests, we could easily use as examples. It's just an interesting, without blowing our horn too much, but just, you have to really be able to think holistically about patients. I think you're more successful Absolutely. When you do. I mean, that's true of every specialty, but in something as in your face and immediate as EM, that certainly is an asset.
So let's move your education along a little bit. I'm interested. You seem to be very tied to your roots in Wisconsin, and yet when it came time to look for a residency, you left the state for a little while. How did that decision come about?
I ended up being fortunate enough to train at the University of Chicago in emergency medicine. I started more or less the year that the show ER came out. Mm-hmm. It was also the year I remember looking at some of these graphs where homicide numbers were up at this crazy peak. Looking at the numbers, this is all sad and crazy for civilization, but it was like you look at the spike at the time I was in training, and then you look back over time, and it was like, oh wow, there was another spike in Prohibition days that was similar. And it's like, wow, this is a crazy time to enter into emergency medicine as this baby doctor person. And I was given that opportunity in part by Dr. David House, who's still one of my mentors, who was the program director. He was from Viroqua. So
no kidding.
Admittedly, a little bit of nepotism there.
How about that?
But, he saw my app come in and, he's like, I don't care what happens. We got to get this guy here. We needed at least one person for Viroqua. So, yeah, I ended up, matching there. And Dr. Howes was my mentor then and still is, as I said. And, the rest is history. And
Hi, I'm Rhonda Crow, founder and CEO for MD Coaches. Here on RX for Success, we interview a lot of great medical professionals on how they grew their careers, how they overcame challenges, and how they handle day-to-day work. I really hope you're getting a lot of great information. But if you're looking for an answer to a specific problem, management or administration challenge, or if you're feeling just a bit burnt out, like maybe you chose the wrong career, well, then there's a faster way to get the help you need. No, it's not counseling, it's coaching. RX for Success is produced by MD Coaches, a team of physicians who have been where you are. I know you're used to going it alone, but you don't have to. Get the support you need today. Visit us at mymdcoaches.com to schedule your complimentary consultation. Again, that's mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians, for physicians, to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests, whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics. Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview. You felt like Chicago was the place where you belonged at the time, and I'm wondering how you came to the decision to go back and embrace the small town life again.
Yeah.
That's a big change.
Yeah, well, right. It was. Well, it's painful to even describe what happened. I mean, and my, this is certainly in proportion to many other people's struggles, which are way worse than mine. But so I'm happening along, kicking butt, just loving life, and boom, I get served. And
oh dear.
Yeah. So the gut check of somebody who's, in my mind, I mean, again, I maybe created my own reality. We all create our own realities, but, in my reality, it was like, I'm doing good and I'm serving people and I'm helping and, it's love and selflessness. And all of a sudden, well, here's your payback, pal. Mm-hmm. Years served. And, and then it's a case that was so removed from my actions as far as the eventual outcome is, as it is so many of the times. It's basically like didn't document as much as I normally would, plus a bad outcome without a clear explanation, low probability, but boom, you put the two together. And then thirdly, in a very, very litigious environment, as many people know. Mm-hmm. And, here you go. You're now down the hellscape rabbit hole of being named and, having to emotionally navigate all of that and just really question everything and come to this realization that my infatuation with Chicago and the social parts of it and the cultural parts and the friendships and the work were an incomplete understanding. And that I now forevermore had to balance the pain of knowing that in the best case scenario, I've got to sit up at night and get up in the morning and think about this stupid case. And if nothing else, just to go to your original question, that allowed me to see the true reality of Chicago, the good and the bad, and rethink everything. I mean, I thought I'd practice there forever. There was no reason I wouldn't. It was like, I'm moving up the academic ladder and leadership of the hospital, a million different things that were all, mostly favorable. And whammo, the realization that you can do an acceptable job, if not excel at what you're doing, and you're probably still going to get named at some point. And to think about going through it again, it just became untenable, especially when I had an alternative, and that is going rural.
Tony, I'm really surprised that we don't talk about this more than we do, and I'm really happy. I can't thank you enough for bringing this up, because as the statistics show, the great majority of physicians in the U.S. Have been accused of malpractice, right. At least once and sometimes multiple times. And your willingness to share it is very generous of you, because it has a profound effect on how you see yourself and how you make decisions. Yeah. And you have really done a beautiful job of bringing that to light. And I thank you so much for sharing that with us. It does have a huge impact, and it's a shame that we don't talk about it more than we do. But that's a great answer to the question.
Right.
It obviously had a profound impact on you. I guess the follow-up is going to be once you were back in the more serene environment, were you able eventually to back off a little bit and give yourself a break and not be seeing lawyers in your dreams and things of that nature?
Exactly. No, that's so well stated. I mean, that's all very insightful as well. And it's true. I mean, and because, you alluded to this, but I mean, there's the stigma of even talking about it. Like you sort of feel embarrassed, or there's shame, like you're, a failure after years of, we tend to be successful people, obviously. And,
sure.
And then you can't talk about it during the case. Like what a crazy thing that is, oh my gosh, they might, if you talk to somebody, they might actually have to testify against you theoretically, whatever. And then, like you said, we know anecdotally and from the evidence that these actions do affect us, like everything. Either we see adversity as something that is going to leave us damaged, or adversity as something that is inevitable and often results in more positive than negative. So, I mean, it's not like we're going to seek out adversity, but I mean, clearly adversity is a path to betterment.
I want to move along. I want to get back to life in Viroqua. Was there, once you got there, were you sure that you'd made the right decision, or did you ever think from time to time, gee, this was a mistake? How was it to readjust?
It was as impactful as that, rounding the bend on that rollover. I mean,
wow.
Yeah, it was. I remember the first few shifts, and to be so appreciated for being there, like not occasionally, but almost always, was such an unbelievable, feeling for an urban emergency doc. It is true, and it's still true. So that was, 2006, as you mentioned, and, my last shift a day or a few days ago, I was just thinking to myself, again, like still, even with COVID and just division and all this crap in the world, like people are still so overtly appreciative, genuinely appreciative.
Yeah.
And, and again, it's not like, that's not the reason you do it, but it sure the heck helps it further, the practice along as far as like your longevity in it.
I want to ask you one other thing about life in Viroqua before we move on to some other things.
Yeah.
And that is COVID has been an incredible burden for not just this entire country, but the entire planet. And you were dealing with it in an emergency room in a place where resources are relatively limited. So I'm wondering if you can tell the audience in less than a couple of hours what was the experience like? What have you taken away from the COVID experience in small town America?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And I feel like I can't do anything justice, because like you said, like we're just one tiny shop amongst 4,600 others that are dealing with the same thing just in America, let alone the rest of the poor world. So for us, I mean, it's been another incredible journey. And then, to be charged with like, oh, I'm the medical director. This is like partly my responsibility. And of course, to this day, we still don't really know exactly what we're doing, understandably. So just kind of making things up as we go along, and, maybe just focusing on the positive of it, like coming up with solutions on an hourly basis, and then testing them and implementing them, and then retesting them and relooking at them and revising them, and just regenerating everything that we do as we go along. And then trying to network with others that are doing the same thing, so that we can kind of crowdsource activities and use social media for something good, which is how do we share all these hacks and workarounds and workflows. I mean, it really was an adventure as much as it was this harrowing journey. And I just feel like in retrospect, at some point, we'll all look back on this, hopefully, and see that this phase and sequence of adversity will also hopefully lead to a slight net positive in ourselves and in the systems that we're charged with overseeing. So yeah, like you said, that's the 2-minute version. There is a 2-hour version available. If anyone wants to call me, I love, chatting about things. So please do.
Yeah. Well, this is a perfect opportunity and a great segue into something that I'm really interested to know about, and I got a feeling that you're probably looking forward to talking about it. But that's the invention of yours called the NTR app, and I want you just to go ahead and give us an explanation for what that is and what it does and why we should be grateful to you.
Right, it is. It's pretty fun to talk about just because it was such an interesting, incredible first ever series of actions. And it's still going on too. So yeah, the NTR, it stands for the National Transfer Registry. So what happened was there was a day when we were working in the ED and it was fairly busy, and we had one transfer and like a really sick COVID, not intubated yet on non-invasive. We had a patient, I think we had just intubated, a different one that wasn't even COVID in retrospect, and then an obstructed jaundice ascending cholangitis who was extremely sick. And I remember thinking the first transfer, knowing at this point, again, a few weeks ago, where we knew we might not actually get a bed. And then to have 2 others. And then, this is a tiny shop. Like there's a few nurses, 1 doc, an APP, and a couple techs and a registration person. And, that's it. And just the act of making these calls to look for hospitals where, you're calling not 5 or even 10, but possibly 50 different places to even know who to call. Like everyone's pretty familiar with, the X number of hospitals within 10 miles of them. What do you know all the hospitals that are 20 miles away, 30, 40, 50 miles away? Do you know how big they are? Do you know what their telephone number is? Do you know if Chippewa Falls is closer than Wisconsin Rapids? Because by EMTALA, you have to go to the closest facility. So with all these like weird issues came up. So we're on Google, Chippewa Falls Hospital, like this is freaking crazy. We're calling the state. Is there a list? And no, we don't have a list. What do you mean list? And we develop a spreadsheet and like, oh, wow, what an innovation, a Google spreadsheet that we can have the contact numbers but we don't know what we're missing. And, I remember one state, who shall go nameless, but you know who you are, gave us a list of hospitals in their state, didn't put the town, just the county. And, so,
wow.
So we're like, hey, Betty, is Polk County closer than Harrison County? And, it was just like, is this really happening? So we went through this exercise and we're calling these places. And then I remember being on a social media site and was talking to other emergency physicians about it. And they said, I asked if they had a list and they didn't. I'm like, oh, we have a list. And they were not that far from us. So I'm like, I'll email you the list. And they were so thankful to have the list because we had already done the work. So why should they do the work? So that
Absolutely.
I remember looking at one of my, colleagues there, and we were like, we should build an app, and it almost gives you chills, and then, like the cliche, like, does anyone know how to build an app? It's just like, it was again, so comical. It would be comical if it wasn't so tragic. So that led to, that was the kind of like real world situation where I think it's Mark Randolph is, one entrepreneur who highlights the fact like, solve a problem for yourself first, and then if
great
it's,
idea.
Right. And then if it's like, hey, that could be used by others, well, maybe you have a project or a business or whatever. So, we literally set out to solve it for ourselves thinking, well, instead of just emailing this spreadsheet, let's just give them a link to an app, not knowing how hard an app, building an app can be. And that was, that was a whole nother thing, which is still ongoing of like how you actually get a functioning app onto Apple App Store and Google Play.
Yeah, I bet.
But we got the first version out. I found an app coder who would actually do the coding, which was really cool. we contracted with a group, a small startup actually overseas using Fiverr, which was a great experience. I've had mostly good experiences using those kind of gig sites to find a virtual partner essentially to do the work. And we're still working with them. And the app we launched the app from conception of the idea to publishing it on the App Store. I think we had the first version out like within a few weeks.
That's pretty unbelievable.
Yeah, it was so incredible the first time you actually see it on the store and know that you were part of a team that helped create something that, even if just a few people, even if it just slightly unburdens them from that part of the work of finding a bed during like catastrophe, it's worth it.
And so if you can be a little bit more granular with it, so the usefulness to this is for the practitioner who is in need of a referral center.
Yeah.
So what you need to know is where is the closest place that has availability.
Right.
And so clearly the user is in the position of knowing exactly what they need.
Mm-hmm.
How does the app know where the availability is?
Right. Okay. So just to be clear, we're still working on that. And that's, if I could rate.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And if I could rate the app, on a scale of like 1 to 10, where like 10 is like earth changing, type product or innovation or something, I'd say it's kind of like a 2 right now. Like it's pretty cool and it has some function and it has some really great function if that's what you really need, which is like you said, you're one of the couple thousand, whatever it is, smaller critical access type hospitals that doesn't have a unit or a lot of specialized things. Transfer them out. You're going to need those, larger receiving centers. And that itself has already, I've already had numerous anecdotes of how much that has helped people, including our own team. So if that's level 1, level 10, just to forward to the end, is a system which remains to be seen because there's still a lot of elements that we need to confirm can actually happen. But our goal with that, which I think again would be this like game changing type of option, would be that receiving center, let's say hospital operations managers, transfer center, like leads, for example, like whoever kind of whoever owns that moment by moment precious knowledge, which is really only knowable by a human being, often just one, is a sense of how many additional patients can we take in this realm at this facility right now. And it's kind of a funky thing, when you think about that. And so our goal, our dream, our drive is to get this app in that person's hands. They would have a different interface, obviously. They'd have an admin interface, but they would see, this is where it gets kind of fanciful, but imagine you're the HOM and, let's just keep it simple. You've got like one big hospital and you've got sort of 3 ICU beds left, but that Rob just called in and now you're down 2 or 3 beds or whatever, And so right then, before anything's even on a dashboard or this or that, because some of this does exist, you cannot take another unit patient. You literally cannot take one additional unit patient. So you jump on the NTR. Instead of, you don't log in a computer, you don't put a number in, all these things that currently exist that nobody really uses, to be honest. And you open the NTR, it's right on your homepage. It goes right to, let's just say, like a swipe right, swipe left type thing for ICU, med surge, whatever categories make sense. And you swipe right and the phone jiggles a little bit and there's like a tone or, some little tiny micro reward for doing the action for that user. Mm-hmm. Now imagine you're standing at the doorway of the call center. You got your 5 or 6, transfer nurses there and the phone's ringing off the hook and they're saying, no, sorry. And their souls are dying a little bit every time they do because they're so good at saying yes. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, again, theoretically, the calls stop because you have just signaled that you have a lower probability of availability. And then as soon as, the ICU calls and like, Sally's going to cover, we're back up to 3 beds. You jump on the app, you flip the switch, another little haptic feedback, and boom, the world knows, like, whatever number, 100,000 people who might be looking for a bed, or 10,000 people, 1,000 people, 500 people, all know that you're back as to a normal probability of availability. Something like that.
That makes a lot of sense and is quite brilliant. It's obviously as valuable if you're standing in the emergency room. It's as valuable to you to know who's full as it is to know who is available, because if you know they're full, then you can take those off the list.
Well, and know reliably for anyone that's participating, maybe everybody, that they're full right now, not like 2 hours ago. Because, as these dynamics change literally on a minute by minute basis sometimes.
Exactly.
So what system could possibly address that? Plus, the other huge thing is that these places don't want to share data that way. And I get it. You know what I mean? Because, they don't want to put out, we have 5 ICU beds and, no, we're not even going to ask for that information. This is just, it's a service, it's information. It's a little bit of a nudge that if 2 equally distant hospitals are, available potentially, that you're going to go with the one with the, more of the red shading, or the green shading versus the red shading, however that works. It's cool. Like, I think you're kind of saying, like, one in the ED, you could imagine where maybe we've got, a status board up in the nurses station where, we have all these kind of monitors and cameras, and it's just, a lot of situational awareness type things in the best type of EDs. One of those boards would be this map of area hospitals, out maybe 100 miles when we're really in it, and admittedly, this app, in a way, we almost hope we don't need,
Of course.
So like, if we don't need the app, we're happy. It's all good. But it's like, we probably will at some point, whether it's this or that or that or this, like we're going to run into overcapacity problems, at least periods of overcapacity in regions. And that's really where the app will be a game changer.
Well, it's really a great idea. And I think as it continues to develop, there's going to be a great deal of enthusiasm for it. And, kudos to you and those who participated with you to get it up and running, because I can't imagine that it's going to be anything other than an incredible success. And I have really enjoyed hearing about this. We've unpacked a lot here, and I wasn't kidding. It sounds like we're going to have you back at some time to talk about some other things. But I want to get us to my favorite part of the program, and that's where I get out of the way and let you have a chance to say what's on your mind and on your heart. So I'm going to close my mic, and Dr. Tony Macasaet is going to give us his personal prescriptions for success.
Thank you, Dr. Cook. I guess I have to preface this by saying, like, I'm still trying to figure out everything, all the time. So this is very humbly shared, but the things that guide me based on experience and what's cool is, and I'm sure a lot of people know, the science behind some of this too, that's sort of proving these kind of age-old, almost wives' tales to be probably the state of reality. And it goes back to a theme that we've followed throughout the podcast today, and that is that adversity can leave by choice sometimes, and knowing that it's not always the case. But like, let me say this again, when adversity can lead to something positive, allow it. Don't seek out adversity, but when it descends, consider almost welcoming it, at least appreciating it. Because, and again, as I think some of the latest science demonstrates, it's true that adversity does lead to longevity. So little bouts of adversity that one recovers from, that doesn't lead to obviously long-term stress and elevated cortisol. Like, obviously you have to avoid that. But where it's these bouts of adversity, it's remodulating the little machineries that tend to the DNA, the epigenome. How crazy is that? And so I think use those moments of challenge to question everything, to reassess, to remodulate, to refresh, and to regenerate into the path of the tribe brave. Like it's another kind of area. I guess maybe the second one is like, I have this like little mantra, favor your inner brave and serve without the expectation of compensation for being that brave, one of the braves of your people. I mean, somebody's got to do that, where you're in it. You're selflessly serving your people. And I guess the last thing that's just been ridiculously impactful for me is to develop a means to compassionately communicate with people. I call it ComCom. And that's simply the notion that you think about how an interaction is making you feel and communicate that in a way that asks for a positive change from the other person back and forth until you achieve a win-win outcome to the communication. And obviously this applies to like areas where there's potential for disagreement. And so use adversity to your benefit, seek balance and deep living, compassionately and effectively communicate and favor your inner brave. And that's my secrets as of today.
Dr. Tony Macasaet, thank you so much for being part of my podcast today and sharing some really insightful thoughts with us. It has been a great pleasure. Before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to toot your own horn about anything that you want to tell us about, whether it be email addresses, LinkedIn accounts, books you want to sell, more about the app, anything that you want to publicize to the audience. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, if anybody wants more info on the app, again, it is available right now for download. Probably the easiest way is just, you can go to like the website, which has a link to the app stores. You can go right on the app stores. The website, one version is just the NTR app. So THENTRAPP.com, thentrapp.com. And then we didn't really talk about this, but I have another company that is doing timber harvesting and timber frame home construction and like hobbit community development on regenerative farms. Another pretty crazy venture. And that's called Regenerative Adventures, or Regenven. And then lastly, I mentioned, I think my dad and I also have a business together with my mom and siblings called the Viroqua Public Market here in Viroqua. We have an Airbnb there, and it's basically a town covered square with like little micro merchants and an amazing restaurant and cooperative art gallery that we helped found the building. We developed the building a number of years ago. And it's another just labor of love, really a wonderful experience for me and a gift to the community. So that's some of the areas where you can kind of find some of these projects. And if anyone wants to reach out to me personally, I'm pretty easy to find on the internet and would love to connect.
Well, once again, Dr. Tony Macasaet, Viroqua, Wisconsin, emergency room physician. It's been a lot of fun talking with you today, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Cook. It's been great.
Thank you so much for joining us today. As always, we really appreciate a review from you, and a 5-star rating helps us a lot. These ratings give our show much more visibility, and they help us reach more listeners. And if you'd like access to exclusive content, head on over to our Patreon page, where you can see membership-only material, including personal rapid-fire Q&A sessions with our guests and more. To be sure you never miss a future episode, visit our website at rxforsuccesspodcast.com to subscribe. And while you're there, you can even offer your very own prescription for success. As always, a very special thanks to Ryan Jones, who created and performs our theme music for us. And remember, be sure and fill your prescription for success with my next episode.